I'll go ahead and start the meeting. Ready?
You guys ready? Okay. Welcome everyone to the Sarpy County Personnel Policy Board. Today is June 12th, 2024. The meeting is now open at, let's see, state time. It is 2:32. A copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is located on the north wall of the county board room. Let me go ahead and get a roll call, please. Jonathan?
Jonathan Davidson, present.
Randy Bennett, present.
Diane Bruce, present.
Thank you. George is not in attendance today, but we'll go ahead and start the meeting here. Let's see. We also have Carrie Plummer-Flecky, Board Secretary, Mary Davis, HR Director, and Kayla Starbuck from the County Attorney's Office. Right here. So we go with agenda item, let's see here. Is that the one? Agenda item 1, to approve minutes from April 17th, 2024, Personnel Policy Board meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes as presented to us.
Second.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Would like to make that motion?
Where you did.
Take a vote.
Yeah.
Take a vote.
All right.
Go ahead and place your vote. Four yea, one absent. Motion carries.
Okay, motion carried. All right, so agenda item 2, discuss paid time off comparisons as requested on April 17th, 2024. Mary Davis from the HR Director is here.
Good afternoon, Board. During our last Personnel Policy Board in April, I believe, George Forrest asked if we would take a look at paid time off comparables of our CIR comparisons. So I have that information for you, and you also have a copy of it on your desk too. So when you look at the CIR comparables, this array that I used was an array that was used back in 2018 with some of the bargaining units for collective bargaining. It is as close to the CIR array that we'll get at this time. And it includes the counties of Greene County, Lancaster, Lynn County, Minnehaha, Potawatomi County, Iowa. I'm sorry, Minnehaha County is in South Dakota. Lynn County, Iowa, Scott County, Iowa, and Washington County, Wisconsin. So when you take a look at those numbers, those are days off per year, and it's 1 through 30 years. Okay, so when you look at the CIR comparables, you'll see that the county is running anywhere from 2 to 4 days over the average, over the midpoint of the CIR comparables. I then took a look at the local market, and the local market that we use on occasion with some of our wage numbers and things would be Douglas County, Lancaster County, Potawatomi County, and then the cities located within Sarpy, La Vista, Papillion, and the city of Bellevue. And when you look at those comparables, it shows that we are slightly under 1 to 2 days under. The proposal is to remove professional leave, which for the classified service are three days per year. They receive those days at the first of the year. They run a calendar year. It's in lieu of overtime. because the exempt employees don't receive overtime, so it's paid time off that they receive for working extra hours throughout the year. So that's what the proposal is.
Can you just refresh my memory? It's use or lose, so it's nothing that carries over that they can keep accumulating every year, right?
Correct, it's use it or lose it.
Right, okay.
Do you have any questions about this, about the comparisons?
Is these professional days like an award that's given, like, is it something like, kind of like a reward for their good service to the Sarpy County?
No, the professional days are strictly for exempt employees who, from time to time, have to work long hours. And so they don't receive pay for overtime. So this is just compensation for working extra hours on certain times of the year. Not everyone. So the department heads, elected officials are responsible for allowing that. So if they have an employee that does not work extra hours, they might not get any extra time off. So it's up to the discretion of the department head and elected official.
And we want to take that away from them, is what this proposal.
The proposal is to remove professional leave.
Right.
Correct.
Do you, as an HR standpoint, do you find that the idea of removing that is going to hurt you as a recruiter, as recruiting new people? Mary?
Yes. You know, in this labor market that we're currently in, I will just tell you that time off is very important. The work-life balance, the people entering the workforce, they look for a work-life balance. It's just that it's the workforce that we are dealing with today. And so, you know, removing any time off, you know, might hurt us in that regard.
Yeah, with these comparisons, and it's showing that Sarpy County is lower than other like counties, you know, the professional days, how does the employees, I know the last personnel board that we had, there was some employees that kind of voiced that they didn't want this to go, but given the state that we're lower than other counties, I kind of feel like what Diane just said about, you know, if they're not, you know, are we giving them mental health days, you know, due to the work that they are performing, or any type of additional days off?
So the days off that I took a look at would be sick leave, vacation, wellness days, any kind of admin days, holidays,
Okay.
floating holidays. So those were the categories that we looked at. And, you know, so with that, if we have employees that need mental health days, or if they're suffering from a mental health issue, you know, that would qualify under sick leave.
Are you concerned as HR that those people that are in those positions right now are possibly going to leave and you'll be retraining new people in the near future for those same positions?
As a result of removing,
Of removing the professional leave. I mean, my opinion is that to retrain people, it costs almost as much as what we're trying to take away. So to add that training, you're costing the training time, the on-the-job training, or sending them somewhere. So I guess I'm just wondering if that balances out, or if you're concerned, are they actually gonna, do you think they're actually gonna leave by removing it?
you know, and it's hard to say.
Right.
I'm just not sure. You know, we have had, HR has had quite a few phone calls from employees that are upset about this. Now, have they said they're going to quit
Right.
and leave? We haven't gotten that, you know.
good.
But it's just something that they, you know, look at when they look for other types of employment. Paid time off is just it's an important piece. So, And Stephen, when you were talking about the comparables, so we have the two arrays that we're looking at, the state of Nebraska, with our collective bargaining rules, we look at the CIR comparables, if you will. When we have to go down to the commission for wage disputes and things of that nature, we have to look at the CIR comparables. The local market gives us just a different piece of information. It tells us what's going on in the local market where we are recruiting from. Okay. So we're over on days in the CIR market, and we're slightly under on days in the local labor market, if that makes sense.
Oh, thank you.
This only touches exempt employees, correct?
This is only exempt employees.
Thank you.
Correct.
And secondly, does this eliminate a manager's ability to give compensatory time? For example, the morning after somebody stays till midnight to work on a project?
No, so they don't get comp time,
I'm sorry.
for that.
I'm
but-
using offsetting, like you
Right.
stay till
They can
midnight.
flex.
So you can use flex, just don't come in till 10 tomorrow because
Sure.
you've been very dedicated today. This doesn't eliminate those managers or department heads' ability to do that, does it?
No, it does not. No, so
Thank you.
if somebody's working long hours, Monday through Thursday, and the manager says, you leave Friday afternoon, they certainly have the ability to do that, and that would be the preference
Perfect.
of how this was presented.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary, were you contacted by anyone to request to make comments?
I was.
Okay,
Commissioner Kelly,
okay,
he would like to address the board.
okay. Meeting is open for comments.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Kelly. I'm the Sarpy County Commissioner, and I'm here representing the full board, county board, the other 4 members. I think I should give you a little bit of background to let you know how we got here, because I think it's important that you know the context. When I first ran for county commissioner and got elected, and I came into office, I learned that I had a benefit of free health care paid for by the taxpayers of Sarpy County. And I said, boy, what a great deal that is. Until I looked around and found out that the only one getting it were the elected officials and a few key people in leadership positions. And my background's in military, which is a total meritocracy, where everybody's treated the same, whether you're the lowest airman or the highest general. You had the same benefits, the same amount of days off, the same everything. And I just thought it was kind of obvious that if people are treated different in the same organization, it can't be good for morale. And so I asked around, does this bother you? And the answers I got back were unanimous. Yeah, that bothers me. The highest paid people get the free stuff, and we, the rank and file, we don't get anything. So I've been spending the last 11 years as a commissioner trying to even the playing field, and it's very difficult to do because we have so many collective bargaining units, and they negotiate their terms in good faith, and depending on the month or year, they either got them or they didn't. So we had all kinds of different employee groups treated differently. And so we have been spending the last several years trying to equalize everybody so that when you come to work for Sarpy County, you're going to be treated the same as everybody else. Now, I realize that these exempt employees are salaried folks, but I think the data that you saw shows that they're compensated and treated very, very well in comparison to our CIR group and also to the local market. One of the things you didn't see in that chart is this year, a couple months ago, we added 5 days of paid vacation for every new hire that comes into the county. If you incorporate those 5 days in, even though you might see a minus, it will equalize over time. So unfortunately, what happens in some of these with these programs is instead of the intent of to reward somebody for extra hours of work, they just became paid time off programs. That's really all they were. So we have a small group of people in the county that are getting a benefit that's not given to anyone else. So we got rid of the non-exempt. I get confused. Was it the non-exempt we got rid of? Unclassified. And this is just to clean up the action to make sure everybody is treated the same. So I know these people work hard. That's not the issue here. But as you were told, and Jonathan asked, that doesn't alleviate a supervisor for giving them time to equalize. So if you're burning the midnight oil, and a lot of our people do that every day, the supervisor has the flexibility to be able to compensate for that, and they do. And that's been my observation. So I think what we really want the board is for you guys to make a recommendation to us so that we can level the playing field. And I think as we go through the next round of collective bargaining, one of our goals is to make sure when we're all done that everybody has the same holidays and is treated the same in terms of all the benefits that we offer. Now, most of you guys work in private sector, right? And you understand that if you compared what your private sector positions do to what we have in government, it's a tough comparison. In my civilian job, I'm the chief operating officer of a small business with about 125 employees. And our employees get 15 days of paid time off. They get 11 holidays, and they don't get any sick leave or any of that stuff. There's no pension, or there's no deferred compensation plan. There's none of that stuff. So I think we treat our employees great. And the reason we do that is because we want to attract a high-quality workforce. And once we attract them, we want to retain them. And I would tell you, in my opinion, is that if somebody is willing to leave a job because they lost 3 days of PTO or the potential of 3 days of PTO, then they're not really committed to the organization in the first place. So we would appreciate your favorable recommendation to the county board so that we can level the playing field and accomplish the goal of treating all our employees the same, valued, very highly valued team members of the Sarpy County team. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Zach Hergenrader with Sarpy County Public Works. I'm the senior engineer. I'd like to address some of those comments that Commissioner Kelly made. He said he'd like to make everything fair and even. We're giving new employees that additional 40 hours. I understand that. I think that's great. But then you're turning around and taking away from current employees that use these 3 extra days of time off. I believe if you wanted to make it fair, we'd give all current employees 40 hours. If you want to keep everything fair. Going to the comparables, the CIR comparables, I went through and I had a chance to dig into some of these numbers, and I found a handful of errors looking county to county. So if we look at Lynn County, Iowa, they actually have 12 days off, or for 12 days of holidays, not 11 that's shown on here. So that bumps up the total days off to 36. Minnehaha County, South Dakota actually allows for an additional 6 days of extended sick leave. So that's 2 or more days of sick leave. So if you include that with the time off, it actually bumps that up to 33.5 days per year. And then with Washington County, Wisconsin, huge error there. They actually offer 30 days of PTO, not the 20 that's shown in this chart. So that would bring the total up to 39 days per year. And if you average all of those out, it brings the average from 35 up to 37.5 days. So that So if we do take away these 3 administrative days from Sarpy County employees, that would actually bring us below the CIR counties that we're comparing us to. So along with that, I think you also need to look at population change in the CIR counties. When you look at the population change from 2020 to 2023, most of these counties are way below what we've seen as far as population growth in Sarpy County. You have some that actually lost people. You've got a negative 0.2% loss, negative 0.5% loss, negative 0.6% loss, and then a 1.9% increase, 1.9% increase. Sarpy County is increased by 4.9%. And when you look at population growth, that equates to workload that we're seeing, because when you have more people coming in, more need for infrastructure, and that's more workload on us. So we're going to be working longer hours to accomplish that work. And like was stated before, we don't receive overtime pay. So when we work those long hours, especially during construction season, we look forward to these extra days off that we can use to compensate for that time that we worked additional. Let's see. Also, these professional days are benefits for employees that routinely work outside of business hours, like I stated. We've also had issues gaining new hires. If we're looking at a prospective employee, if somebody applies to Sarpy County, they're not going to go to Minnehaha, South Dakota and apply there also. We're competing with Papillion, Bellevue, Douglas County, possibly Lancaster and Pottawatomie County. So I think it'd be better to look at local comparables, which is, I think, on the back of that sheet that Mary provided. Say we have, let's see here. So an employee that's been working for Sarpy County for 15 years gets a total of 50 days off per year. To get that same amount, somebody working for City of Papillion only has to be there for 9 years. It's 4 years for Bellevue. But yet an employee has to work here for 15 years to match what somebody in Bellevue is getting in 4 years. We've got many employees in our department that have worked here for 30 plus years. They're maxed out at 53 and a half hours, or 53 and a half days per year of time off. You get that in Papillion in 20 years, in La Vista in 16 years. I feel that we're way behind these local agencies that we're competing with. And we need to step up our game and allow more time off, not take it away from current employees. Let's see. So I guess with that, I'll just say that I'm completely against removing the 3 additional professional days that were given. You could have an elected official or department head that's very stringent and is not going to allow people to take time off. If you get rid of this, we have no way of fighting back against that. But with having these 3 extra days, we can point to a policy and say, hey, we're allowed this. We've been working outside of our working hours, so we should be able to have compensation for that. It's also going to hurt morale if you take it away. I know there's tons of people in our department that are upset that this is even being considered. It's going to be harder to retain people, and we're going to have a hard time getting new employees in here if we reduce this.
How many people do you have under you that are under this policy?
I believe we have 9 in our department, 7 or 9, somewhere in that
Let's
range.
say 9.
That's
Of those
7.
9, how many people do you think actually use the full
All of them.
benefit? Okay.
Yep.
And do you have the same amount of workload on each person? Is everybody putting in an extra 15 hours a week during construction time? Or are they some doing 2 and some doing 15? Because
It's hard to say. Our workload does vary.
Okay.
But everybody does put in those extra hours. We take calls from citizens about road issues after hours. We attend meetings with consultants and property owners after hours consistently. We receive emails, phone calls that we're expected to reply to right away from commissioners with issues that they've been told about. So we do have that additional workload outside of hours.
And it was said that new hires get an additional 5 days when they're hired
Yep.
in Sarpy County.
Yeah, and that was just passed at the last personnel board meeting.
How about existing employees with Sarpy County? Do they get any incentive with that?
No, sir.
Do you feel that these 3 days would be kind of like if they were to stay? Do you think that it would be taken in consideration to that adjustment for the 5 days that are given to new hires?
It wouldn't be completely equal, but yes, it could be considered.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Do we have any more comments? Okay.
I just have a quick comment.
Mary, do you know of just in general, the Sarpy County employees that are using this, do you see everyone using this policy, or are there some that don't take advantage of it?
Well, there's some that
I
don't.
mean,
take it.
budget-wise, are you real, I mean, can you add it up and say, here's exactly what we're giving away?
So we had 29 employees that are eligible for the professional leave for this, this classified group.
Mary, I'm sorry, could you
Sorry.
repeat that number?
Yes, we had 29 employees that were eligible, and 15 employees used them
Okay.
in 2023. Yep. And I'll just, I have a comment about the data, the CIR data. I will definitely look, I mean, because I want to look at what was just talked about on those numbers. But when I requested the information, I requested it from the Human Resources Department and asked for those exempt management staff. So I will stand by with the information that I have for right now. I did not include extended sick leave into this because Sarpy County has a illness donation program as well. And the extended sick leave were for those people who had catastrophic illnesses in that county that needed additional time off. And so they could apply for that. So I did not include, he's correct on that. I did not include that in our numbers. So with that, at the end of the day, I will just tell you that the CIR comparables will typically be under Sarpy, and the local comparables will typically be a little bit above Sarpy, for sure.
When they asked about the comp time, how long do they have to use that? Is there a time limit that they can, I mean, if their supervisor will say, hey, you've been working long hours, take a couple days off. But like he mentioned construction season, it's going to be months before they get to take that time off. Is there a time limit as to when they can take advantage without using their professional leave?
Yeah, it's, well, when you're allowed to flex your time, it's within that pay period for
It's during
exempt
the pay period.
employees.
Okay, so
Correct.
they don't have an opportunity during busy seasons to actually take advantage of that.
Not unless they can get away, a late afternoon or something like that. It all depends on what their work schedule is.
Right.
And time off can be considered by like a supervisor. I know it was mentioned that that can be given by like a direct report if someone needs to kind of take a day off or make adjustments in their work hours schedule. That's at the discretion of a supervisor or direct report.
As far as the supervisor approves their time off request. So if the direct report worked extra hours, Monday, during the week or whatever, and the supervisor allowed them to flex their time during that, they would have to have the supervisor's approval to flex their time
Okay.
During that pay period.
during that pay period, for
They're
sure.
not allowed to flex it outside of from one pay period to the next? I mean,
No, we shouldn't be doing that.
Okay. Is there any more questions for Mary?
Mary, have you talked to all the department heads about this particular policy change, and what's their consensus on this? On taking this away from them? Is there any consensus? Or have you even talked, about this?
I've heard from a number of department heads, and they don't agree with removing the time off.
Did we even
They
have,
don't agree with the policy change.
did we have one department head that agreed with it? Any? No, nobody did?
I didn't hear from any that agreed with it. I don't know if they would have contacted me directly.
I'm good.
Does anyone else have any comments for Mary? If not, thank you, Mary.
Welcome.
I'll go ahead and close the time for comments for the open forum here. And,
Stephen, we don't need to vote on this one.
Okay.
Discussion only.
Go ahead and state the time to close for comments, though, and then you can move on to the next agenda item.
Okay. Time to close for comments is 3:03. All right. So, interesting discussion that we just had. Let's see here. All right. I know, I'm just trying to think if we should. All right, do we have a motion?
We're not voting on that.
Oh, we're not
just need to
going-
go to
We're moving to the
item
next
3.
item.
Move on to agenda item 3.
Okay, so we're just holding off on the vote, okay. Good. So we'll go to, agenda item number 3. To discuss and make recommendations to personnel rules and regulations, Rule 12, type of leave, Regulation 10, professional leave. Discuss and make recommendations to personnel rules and regulations, Rule 12, type of leave, Regulation 2, vacation. That'll be presented by Mary Davis, HR Director.
So Rule 12, Regulation 10, professional leave. The proposal is to remove that from the classified rules and regulations. And it was carried over from the previous meeting in April so that we could collect information on comparables.
Okay. Mary, were you contacted by anyone to request to make any comments on this?
Those-
Okay. All right, since no one requested to appear before the board and give their views on the proposed rule, therefore no comment period was provided. Got it. Let's see. So we'll go ahead and say, see what happened. Motion on this part. Oh, no.
I can't make a
just-
motion because I don't
Yeah,
agree with it.
do we have a motion to
This is to remove the
Yeah, to
professional
remove-
development.
It's to remove the professional leave.
Yeah.
I can't make a motion on that.
Yeah.
I don't agree.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
I'll second.
All right, we'll take it to vote.
I have 2 ayes, 2 nays. Motion fails.
Yeah. Let's see.
You want to send it for a vote again?
So we'll go to agenda item 4. So we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item 4. Discuss adding Personnel Policy Board meetings to review policies, additional meetings starting August 14th, 2024. Meetings will need to be scheduled for September, October, November, and December of 2024, presented by Mary Davis, HR Director.
Yes, this is just an item for you guys to think about. So when we meet in August of 2024, I'm sorry, when we meet this August, we would like to schedule meetings every month throughout the rest of the year, just to go over the personnel policies and because we're in the process of revising our handbooks and things. So we'd like to have regularly scheduled meetings throughout the end of the year, from August through the end of the year, in order to get a move on that, if you will.
Have placeholders been sent for those dates?
They have not been set for those
I know
dates,
that
so.
there's one set for August,
Right.
but not for the September, October, December?
Yeah, they have not been set. So we ask that y'all take a look at your calendars, and then we will be in touch and kind of put those placeholders together for you. Okay.
Do we have a motion of to approve additional meetings and dates?
I'll move to approve that.
Second.
Hang on, just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. For A, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next agenda item is a grievance hearing in regards to Sergeant John Sorick of Sarpy County Corrections.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the Personnel Policy Board of Sarpy County is conducting a hearing on the grievance of John Sorick. Council, would you please enter your appearance with the county first?
Kayla Starbuck on behalf of the County of Sarpy.
Thank you, Ms. Starbuck.
Gary Young for John Sorick.
Thank you, Mr. Young. The Personnel Policy Board Hearing Regulation 5 provides a formal procedure for our hearing today unless the parties have agreed otherwise. And it's my understanding the parties haven't deviated from the Personnel Policy Board process?
That's correct.
Okay. So before we get started in opening statements, I understand there's been a stipulation that all exhibits, Exhibit 3, by stipulation of the parties, are being requested as admitted into evidence. Is that correct, counsel?
That's correct.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so all exhibits will be received into evidence except Exhibit 3. Ms. Starbuck, would you like to make a statement about Exhibit 3?
Yes, we've removed Exhibit 3 from the packets that you have. We are going to make a factual stipulation as to Exhibit 3 because there were some contents that were not agreed upon. And I'm going to go ahead and read those facts into the record now, and then I'll give Mr. Young an opportunity to agree with those facts to approve this stipulation, if that's okay with you.
That's acceptable.
Okay, so the facts that we are stipulating to is that Lieutenant Julie Nielsen received notification of a complaint from Human Resources on March 26th of 2024, and that Sergeant Sorick received notice of the internal affairs investigation on March 27th, 2024.
That's correct.
Lieutenant Nielsen, in conjunction with Human Resources, completed interviews of 6 corrections officers, including Sergeant Sorick.
That's correct.
Sorick was told he could provide a written response to the complaint.
That's also correct.
A findings report was entered with a recommendation of termination,
Correct.
and that findings report was submitted on April 29th, 2024.
Mr. Young, is that correct?
That is correct also.
That's the conclusion of the factual stipulation.
So we'll assume that those facts are admitted into evidence also? Great. Ms. Starbuck, I understand you have an opening statement, which, as you know, should be limited to 5 minutes or less.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Kayla Starbuck. I'm a deputy Sarpy County attorney, and in this case, I specifically represent Sarpy County and the management and human resources decisions that were made in this case. In this appeal, Sergeant Sorick is asking you to determine that the ongoing internal affairs investigation be administratively closed because of alleged violations of Standard Operating Procedure 5080 in the Sarpy County Department of Corrections Collective Bargaining Agreement. Sergeant Sorick claims first that the 45-day extension of the investigation was approved in violation of SOP 5080, and second, that the internal affairs investigation was compromised by Lieutenant Julie Nielsen directing Sergeant Sorick's written response be submitted directly to her instead of the confidential staff support secretary. We maintain that Sergeant Sorick's assertions are without merit. This board's review of the grievance is limited to interpretation of the relevant policies of the Sarpy County Personnel Rules and Regulations and the Collective Bargaining Agreement. Today, you will hear testimony from Mr. Jacob Betzworth, Interim Director of the Department of Corrections, and Lieutenant Julie Nielsen, Sarpy County Corrections Lieutenant and Operations Administrator. You will learn that on March 26, 2024, Lieutenant Nielsen was contacted by Human Resources regarding a formal complaint filed against Sergeant Sorick, and Sergeant Sorick received an internal affairs notice on March 27, 2024. You will hear testimony from Lieutenant Nielsen that in conjunction with Human Resources, Lieutenant Nielsen completed interviews of 6 corrections employees, including Sergeant Sorick, in order to investigate the allegations. Lieutenant Nielsen submitted her findings report on April 29th, 2024, 34 days from the start of the internal affairs investigation, with a recommendation of termination of employment. Director Betzworth will testify that upon review of the findings report, he found it critical to continue to investigate, not only for the benefit of the Department of Corrections, but for Sergeant Sorick as well. Director Betzworth, upon receipt of the findings report, sent a memorandum on May 1st, 2024, requesting that 18 additional interviews take place. Lieutenant Nielsen, unable to complete those interviews within the 45-day timeline, sent a request for an extension of an additional 45 days in order to complete the additional interviews and submit a supplemental findings report. This extension was granted by Director Betzworth on May 1st, 2024. SOP 5080 specifically states that failure to meet investigative review deadlines in relation to formal complaints shall not affect the director's right to administer discipline on the investigated employee. Further, Director Betzworth will testify that the confidential staff support secretary, upon receiving Sergeant Sorick's written response to the complaint, would format the complaint and forward it to the primary investigator on the case, in this case, Lieutenant Nielsen. As such, no violation of SOP 5080 occurred. Article 6, Section 2 of FOP 90 Collective Bargaining Agreement expressly states that the director reserves the right to complete internal affairs investigations. No time constraints are addressed in the collective bargaining agreement. The personnel rules and regulations apply to Sergeant Sorick as a classified employee where the collective bargaining agreement is silent, and as such allows Sarpy County to fully investigate and take appropriate disciplinary action against Sergeant Sorick. To be clear, the contents of in the allegations of the formal complaint and internal affairs investigation are not the subject of the appeal that's before you today. Your review is limited in scope to whether Director Betzworth and Lieutenant Nielsen acted in accordance with relevant Sarpy County and Corrections policies and procedures. Sergeant Sorek is requesting that this board determine that the decisions made by management warrant administrative closure of the internal affairs investigation with a finding of not sustained. Today, at the end of evidence, I'm confident you will find that Director Betzworth acted in accordance with Sarpy County and Corrections policies and procedures, and respectfully ask that you deny Sergeant Sorek's grievance appeal and his requested remedy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Starbuck. Mr. Young?
Mind if I approach?
You may. You may.
Thank you.
That's just a case that I'm going to refer to. Is it okay if I speak here so I can?
Go ahead.
Do you have a copy of the case?
Yeah. So this is a case about deadlines. And the question is, did Sarpy County keep a deadline that's in their own rules that they've adopted to protect employees from extended internal affairs investigations? Internal affairs investigations aren't like any other investigation that you go through. It's conducted by police, upon police, very highly stressful. So I represent a lot of FOPs across the state. One of the priorities they have is to limit the time that an internal affairs investigation continues because of the mental health consequences for an extended investigation. So Sarpy, and it's in many of our agreements we have with counties, we have timeframes. They're firmly set out, and you have to comply with them. We don't have one of those in the agreement we're talking about between Sergeant Sorek's union and Sarpy County. Instead, it's in a rule. And that's fine with us because the law is very clear in this case that I just handed out, that if a county personnel agency, in this case it was the Lancaster County Personnel Board, or a county agency like in this case, the Department of Roads for Lancaster County, adopts a rule that has a substantive effect upon an employee, the county must follow that rule, and if it exceeds the rule, its actions are null and void as a matter of law. That's why we're here. The force of this isn't simply a casual matter about whether guidelines or recommendations or good ideas were followed. The question is, has the county followed its own rules that are very important to employees? So important that if it didn't have this rule, we would be negotiating with the county over adopting this rule in a collective bargaining agreement and the consequences of violating it. But we don't have to because the rule exists. If you turn to page 15 of this case, Reef, I'll just sort of highlight the law for you so you can see it. This is a 2019 case in the Nebraska Supreme Court, I believe, or this is 2012. On page 15, you see there in this section here I've highlighted, in the lower left-hand corner of the main text, it says, an administrative decision must not be arbitrary and capricious. Agency action, in this case Lancaster County, is arbitrary and capricious if it is taken in disregard of the facts or circumstances of the case, and so on. Agency action taken in disregard of the agency's own substantive rules is also arbitrary and capricious. And then on the next place I marked for you, you can see the consequences. The court said, summed up, we agree that management had the right to transfer a current employee to a vacancy or to appoint an applicant if it complied with its own rules for doing so. But it did not. And the last sentence in that paragraph shows you the result that the Supreme Court of Nebraska insists that is followed today. The county followed none of these procedures. Therefore, Little's appointment of this person to this vacancy in a job was unlawful and void. So we're asking you to follow the law today about something that's very important. The question is, did the agency, in this case, Department of Corrections, follow its own rule about how long these investigations should last. It is 45 days. There's actually two stages to an investigation of an IA. It's the first period, which is the investigation period. And then once the investigation is completed, it's handed over to others up the chain of command, and they have a review period for which there is an 8-day window for each person that's reading it to review the findings that are originally given and decide if they agree with them. Yes, it should be sustained, or it should be not sustained, or it should be exonerated, and if any discipline should be issued. That's what the review period is about. While there is an extension that's allowed for review periods expressly in the rules of the county, for that period of how long the investigation is allowed to be completed for 45 days, there is no extension allowed in the rules. In fact, it's in two different sections, and the emphasis upon extensions has to do with the review period, so much so that if one of the brass, this is how important that period of time is that we're making a person wait on their future, if one of the brass violates the 8-day rule, there's actually an investigation started against them, unless they have gotten the extension that that specific rule allows for. In this case, the complaint was filed on March 26th of this year. There was an investigation completed, but it turns out the boss of the investigator looked at it and said, this investigation isn't complete. You got to go back and do more.
Mr. Young, just so you know, you are over 5 minutes.
Okay, we allow me to.
Could we wrap it up in 1 minute?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The investigation was so incomplete. You investigated you asked questions of 6 people. You should have done of 24. And so the investigation got sent back, and it's still pending today. It still hasn't complied with the 45-day rule today. We're asking you to require that they follow their own rules. In this case, the result that we've asked for is that you shut down this investigation as the law requires, because anything done now is unlawful and void.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Ms. Starbuck, please present your case.
Thank you. Sarpy County calls Lieutenant. Sorry. Thank you. Sarpy County calls Lieutenant Julie Nielsen. Hi, Lieutenant. Can you please state your name and your title for the board, please?
Julie Nielsen, the Operations Administrator for Sarpy County Corrections.
And how long have you been in that position?
Since April of 2022.
What did you do prior to being in that position?
I was a deputy for the Sarpy County Sheriff's Office since January of 2013.
Ms. Starbuck, can I swear this witness in before you started?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
My apologies.
No problem. Ms. Nielsen, I know you've stated your full name. Would you state it again for the record?
Julie Nielsen,
And your position with the county?
Operations Administrator.
Great. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you just restate your prior work history now that you are under oath?
Yes, I was a deputy for Sarpy County from January of 2013 until I switched over to corrections in April of 2022.
And in your work experience at the sheriff's office or at corrections, are you familiar with how line investigations, internal investigations take place?
I am.
Can you describe your familiarity and your experience with such investigations?
With line investigations, IAs, incident reviews, all investigations that have taken place in corrections, we receive some sort of notification, whether it's a written formal complaint. We're made aware of an incident that needs to be investigated, whether it's a policy violation, something along those lines. We serve that individual with a notice. At that time, they are told they need to submit a report within 5 days of that notification. And then that's when we look at anybody that we may need to interview, speak with, request reports from. That information is collected, and then a final report is written and then submitted. in that instance, I complete my report, I send it up my chain, assistant director, and then she sends it up.
Were you working on March 26, 2024?
Yes.
What happened that day?
I was made aware from our assistant director, Joe Martin, that HR received a complaint from Sergeant Pena Herrera, formal complaint against Sergeant John Sorick with a number of different things.
What did you do after you received that notice?
I spoke with Carrie Plummer-Galecki from Human Resources to gather a plan. Since the formal complaint was filed with HR, we worked in conjunction together to gather facts and figure out who we needed to interview and kind of get a timeline going.
Did you serve Sergeant Sorick with an internal affairs notice?
I did on March 27th.
And after that was served, how did you go about investigating the formal complaint?
Once Sergeant Sorick was served that notice, he submitted a report, and then we set up interviews with individuals that we thought would be, that would have information regarding the incidents, and collected all of that, and then submitted my findings report, reviewed it, and submitted that report.
Do you recall what date you submitted your findings report?
It was April 29th, 2024.
And did you interview Sergeant Sorick?
I did.
And did Sergeant Sorick ask you to submit a written report?
He asked to submit his response to the written complaint. He had not seen a copy of the complaint that was actually filed with HR until the day of his interview. At that time, when he asked, Carrie and I agreed that we would allow him the time to submit a written response to the complaint.
Okay, and did you ask that he submit that response to you?
Yes, Carrie and I said he could have just emailed it to us.
Okay, and why is that?
Because we were the ones investigating the situation. It wasn't his initial report. He'd already submitted an initial report, which went to that confidential staff support secretary. So this was an additional written response that we were allowing him to respond to.
And are you aware of any time constraints for internal affairs investigations?
Allowed 45 days for them to be completed. If there's situations that come up, anything that we would need an extension for, we can submit a written request to our director with the explanation of why we would need that extension.
And you testified earlier you submitted your findings report on April 29th, 2024. Was this within that 45-day timeline?
Correct. I think it was 35 days-ish, right in there.
Would it have been possible to complete additional interviews within that original 45-day timeline?
Not the amount of interviews that we were wanting to add.
Okay. Is the internal affairs investigation still occurring?
It is.
And in your experience, have you ever been asked to conduct further investigation once your findings report had already been submitted?
I have not. This is my 5th internal investigation that I've completed. Our security lieutenant is the one that usually does the internal affairs. So in the 4 that I have done, no. And other things that I've done, investigations that I've done, I have not had to ask for, but they haven't been to the extent of this amount of information that we needed to collect.
And what do you mean by that?
So initially we interviewed the 6 people. We received a list that we wanted more information from approximately 18 more employees. So to gather that and efficiently make sure that we're not rushing, that we could get these interviews scheduled in a appropriate amount of time, gather the information, review the information, we needed that extension.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Let me ask, do you have a copy of the exhibits in front of you? Maybe?
Binder.
Okay, I think so, yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
it's the grievance here. I'm assuming from the
Okay.
glance through here.
All right, I might just ask you to look at those occasionally, so
Okay.
I'll just refer you to those. So let me ask you about what you understand the process to be for an IA investigation. We talked about the 45 days. What happens after you submit your investigation findings report? According to Rule 5080, what happens next?
I submit it up to my next chain of command, which is the assistant director.
Okay. And why do you do that? What is the purpose of that?
So she can review my information. She can review all of the details of the investigation, and she can determine whether she agrees or disagrees with my recommendation.
In fact, there's a review process in the rule, correct?
As far as once I send it up,
Yes.
yes, it allows them the 8 days.
Okay. And so what, if you can just turn to, I'm referring to the process, this rule that we're talking about, just for the board's sake, is exhibit number 8. Can you tell me, just so we can build a little bit of background for the board, what this is?
This is our complaint procedure policy that lays out administrative leave, different definitions, the rights of the employee, the confidentiality, just lays out everything for investigations.
All right. So this is the procedures that you have to follow when you conduct an investigation.
Correct.
And if you look at page 1 there, where it talks about the policy, do you see that? The purpose of, if you look at the first paragraph there, you recognize that the purpose of this policy is to protect the parties involved in the investigation, including the person that's accused and the person who is accused, who's made the complaint.
Correct.
Is that okay? And are you required to follow this policy when you conduct an investigation?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't follow this policy and do it a different way, what are you subject to being evaluated negatively by your supervisors?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. Did you review this policy before you conducted the investigation, the initial investigation of Sergeant Sorek?
Yes, I reference this often.
Okay. So if you look, if you just turn with me just a second to page 7 of this policy. There's a lot going on in the policy about different kinds of complaints. That paragraph K, it refers to a particular kind of complaint, which is a formal complaint by another employee. Do you see that?
I do.
What's the difference between a formal complaint and another kind of complaint, if you know?
Well, a formal complaint is a written complaint that's put on paper. As far as a different type of complaint, I'm not sure if you're talking about just a verbal complaint or something else. I mean, a formal complaint is usually either on the formal complaint form that we have, or it's a written letter that somebody provides. In this case, that formal complaint was provided to Human Resources.
All right. And I know there's another type of investigation that is done in your department called a line investigation.
Correct.
Could you just describe to the board what that is?
A line investigation is just I don't want to say a less serious investigation, but depending on what we're investigating determines whether it's a line investigation or an internal affairs investigation.
All right. And a line investigation is conducted not by the internal affairs process, but by the supervisor. Is that right?
Depending on what it is. I could complete a line investigation on an officer. It doesn't have to be their direct supervisor.
All right. But if there's a formal complaint filed on paper and so on that you described, you're required to follow this process, I understand. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And paragraph K on page 7 is where that begins, and it outlines the kinds of things that are the subject of formal complaints. Do you see that?
I do.
And then the next paragraph is paragraph 11, and there is a internal review process for formal complaints. Can you tell me what that is?
You said number 11? Are you talking about
Excuse me, on
11?
page 8.
Page 8?
Yeah, my mistake. It's paragraph L, sorry.
Okay. Now, what was your question?
That section's talking about initial review of formal complaints. Just tell us briefly what happens then in the process.
When a formal complaint is received, it is reviewed to determine whether the information in the formal complaint is valid and whether that investigation needs to continue.
So is it fair to say it's kind of like an initial look to see if there's anything to it? If there is, we go forward. If there isn't, it can be stopped at that point.
Correct.
And who makes that decision?
Myself, if I have questions, I can take it up the chain of command. Or this references the security administrator, which is the other lieutenant. He also completes them.
Okay. If a formal complaint then is to go forward, if you turn to page 9 of that exhibit, still on exhibit number 8, do I understand the processes for undertaking that investigation are in paragraph M? Is that correct?
M is in Mary.
Yes.
That's the administrative supervisor responsibilities.
Okay. And it contains, it describes here who is going to conduct the investigation of an IA. Isn't that right?
Yeah,
That's done by the administrative supervisor.
correct.
Is that what you are relative to Sergeant Sorek?
Yes,
Okay. And then you can, it says you can provide directives, I assume, so that they have to file reports or attend interviews and so on. Is that right?
correct.
All right. Now, in Rule 3, it provides the timeline that we've been talking about. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And what does that say?
After investigation completion, shall complete all relevant reports and may include a separate report listing potential policies involved. IA investigations shall be completed and submitted to the security administrator within 45 days from the time the complaint was received/taken.
Okay. And that's referring to the responsibility of the administrative supervisor conducting the IA. Is that correct?
Yes,
All right. And that, in this case, that happened to be you.
correct.
And I understand from what you testified earlier that you did submit an IA investigation, I assume to the security administrator as written here.
I submitted it. So the way this is written, the security administrator is equal to my position.
Okay.
So I submitted it to the assistant director.
Okay. And that was just because it happened to involve where you are in the rank schedule?
Yes,
Okay. And you did that, you submitted it to, is that Joe Martin?
correct.
And did you submit that to her on what date?
April 29th, 2024.
And at the time that you submitted that, did you believe that you had completed the investigation?
To that point, yes.
And did you make recommendations as to findings of whether the investigation complaint was sustained or not sustained or founded or unfounded or any of those check the box categories that we see on the forms?
Yes,
Okay. And at that point, you made those recommendations, and it sounds like you also made a recommendation for a disciplinary level of punishment, correct?
yes,
And you submitted that to Joe Martin.
correct.
Can you tell me procedurally, and maybe a little too technically, how do you actually submit that?
We have a program called Guardian Tracking that we are able, each employee has a profile on Guardian Tracking. So all evidence, reports, everything we go through for these investigations is uploaded to this Guardian Tracking. In this case, it would have been under John Sorek's name, so it can go back and be referenced at any time. I submit my findings report, I submit my classification and disciplinary review form, and then I physically go in and submit that to Joe Martin counting out 8 days, calendar days, of when it's due, and then it sends it to her.
Okay, and when you say the 8 days that creates a due date for somebody,
Correct.
what do you mean by that?
So I have the 45 days to do my initial, then I submit that,
Okay.
and the assistant director has 8 days to review everything, make her recommendation, whether she agrees, disagrees, and then she will then submit that up to the director with the same 8 days.
So he has 8 days.
Following 8 days,
So he has 8 days also.
correct.
Now, if you turn to page 11, paragraph O of this policy exhibit number 8, the policy 5080, it states there in paragraph 1, upon completion of an investigation, it shall be classified. And then that's to be documented in a findings report. Now, is that something you did in this case?
Yes.
Okay, and when just for those who don't understand this terminology, what does it mean to be classified?
I put my recommendation on whether I believe that the allegations from the formal complaint and the policy violations that I found during my investigation, whether they were sustained, not sustained, and or if it would be closed, whatever the case may be. In this case, I put that the policy violations that I found were sustained.
All right, and then if you turn the page, it shows the rest of those categories you just described, those classification titles. On paragraph P, then, it describes the next step of the process. Do you see that?
I do.
It says the paragraph 1 on page 12, paragraph P and subparagraph 1, it says the investigator shall route the investigation file to the following individuals for review, and each reviewer shall update the classification and disciplinary form and add their signature to the file, forward the investigation file to the next chain of command. You see that?
I do.
Now, this is what I referred to earlier. Is that a check the box kind of form where they say whether they agreed with your findings and so on?
Yes, it's submitted with the findings.
All right. And that goes in this rule, it says it goes to the security administrator or the operations administrator.
Correct.
But as I understood it, because of the rank situation, the chain of command, it went right to the assistant director.
Well, yes, because myself, as the operations administrator, completed the investigation, and so therefore it went
Okay.
right to the assistant director.
Okay. And her job then is to, within this 8-day period, is to review the classification.
She reviews all of it.
Okay.
They review anything that's uploaded into Guardian Tracking.
All right. But the point of this review process is that she may say, well, I believe that it's not sustained, or I believe differently than what your conclusions were.
Correct.
Correct. And she also then may make a recommendation that would be different on the level of punishment from your recommendation, correct?
Correct. And she would write a memo at that point and submit it if that was the case.
Okay. And that is to be done within 8 days?
Correct.
Now, I understand there is an extension that's permitted if the person that's received this can't complete it within the 8 days. Are you aware of that?
Are you talking about let's see.
Just turn to page 4 of that exhibit. Under time constraints, do you see that?
Yes.
And I'm just going to, it's page 4, paragraph E, subparagraph 4.
Okay.
Upon receiving I'm just going to read it so to help us work through this. Upon receiving the completed investigation file, each reviewer shall have 8 calendar days to complete their review and return the file to the next chain of command. Now, that's what we've been talking about, right?
Yes.
That's what you did with Assistant Director Martin?
Yes, we'll send it to her.
Okay. Extensions may be approved by the director. Okay. When an extension is approved, the employee shall be given a status report regarding the investigation. Let's keep going. The request for an extension and response to the extension request shall be added to the electronic file. I assume that's through Guardian, is that right?
Yes.
And then paragraph B, a line investigation shall be initiated on reviewers who fail to review this within 8 calendar days and do not request and receive an extension. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. So if, in this case, if the director, Assistant Director Martin would have decided, you know what, I can't get this done, reviewed it in 8 days because of other matters, what does she have to do to get more time, as you understand it?
She would have had to write a memo to the director requesting that extension.
Okay. And he could say yes or no, right?
Correct.
Okay, turn to the next page, page 5. Paragraph C at the top, subparagraph C. Do you see that?
I do.
That states failure to meet investigative review deadlines shall not affect the director's right to administer discipline on the investigated employees. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Does that exception there that says that, you know, what happens if I don't meet the deadline, does that state anything about the 45-day period that you had to originally complete this investigation?
It doesn't.
Okay. Could go back on page 4 briefly. Again, paragraph 4 states, upon receiving the completed investigation file, each reviewer shall have 8 calendar days to complete their review and return the file to the next chain of command. Extensions may be approved by the director. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Would you agree with me that that paragraph says nothing about whether extensions may be approved to the original 45-day period that you had to complete the investigation?
I would agree. It does not say anything about the 45 days in that paragraph.
Okay. Is there another paragraph where it does?
As far as
In this
the
rule.
extension,
Yes.
give me just a minute.
Yeah, take your time. It's a lot of pages there.
Okay, what was your question? Did you have a question? I forget. I found the 45-day point in the policy that I was looking for, but
Right. You'd said that in this spot regarding the 8-day review, there was this language, and I asked you if there was any language there about the 45-day period.
and I answered no.
Yeah, and I think you said something like not there or something.
Not there yet.
Do you know of anywhere else there is?
Well, it talks about the 45 days on page 10, paragraph number 3, saying that has to be completed within 45 days from the time the
Correct.
complaint was received.
Right.
So, but in that, it does not say anything that it has to, that an extension is only for that 8-day extension.
I understand. Let me ask you, in your case with this investigation, we talked about the first stage was you complete your work and then you hand it to the chain of command for their review, 8-day kind of review periods. With regard to your investigation that you turned in on the 29th of April, that classification disciplinary review process never even occurred, did it?
What do you mean it never occurred?
Well, they didn't go through and in 8 calendar days give you a check the box form back saying whether your classification of the investigation had been agreeable to them or not?
I submitted mine, and then it went to Assistant Director Martin, so it completed that first 8-day.
Well,
mean,
did she issue a classification and discipline review form back to you?
She did not at that point.
Did she complete one?
No, because it was deferred back to me.
It was deferred back to you by who?
She sent it back to me
Okay.
because I had received the list of employees that the interim director wanted us to interview.
Okay. So let's turn to that exhibit. I think it's 5. No, that's not right. It might be it's not 3 either.
It's number 4.
4, okay. So getting back to kind of my thought there was, before it got to the final stages of review of your original investigation that you submitted before the May 10th deadline, the investigation was kicked back to you, am I right?
Correct.
And by the director.
Correct.
And in that case, he stated that the investigation was not complete. Isn't that correct?
That is true.
He wanted additional information to be gathered for the investigation.
Correct.
And you had investigated a certain set of people, which was, I think, 6.
Correct.
But he wanted you to investigate 18 more. Is that
Correct. And
correct?
that list wasn't all inclusive. We would have felt like we needed to add more people. We would have added who we
Okay.
felt that we needed to.
And I suppose if you had investigated, if you had questioned all these people before you had submitted your original investigation, you might have had different conclusions about what was the findings. Am I right?
Could have been.
Okay. You might have done additional investigative work, like if somebody said, well, there's video of this, you can go here, you can go there, those sorts of things that happen in investigations, correct?
Opens different doors, yes.
Right, okay. And so I assume you said, okay, I'm going to go do what the director has asked me and continue the investigation. Is that fair?
Yes.
And I assume you've been doing that since we met before about this, correct?
Yes.
All right. You've not yet, am I right? You have not yet submitted a findings report to Guardian for the completed investigation that includes all of this work and whatever ancillary work that might have been required due to what you found in your investigation.
No, I have not.
Okay. If you had complied with the original, well, when you originally filed your investigation report, your original one, maybe we call it a draft, let's say, did you comply with the 45-day rule at that time?
Yes, I had it submitted. I think I said 35 days at the 35-day mark.
Do you know the date, the 45-day date would have been?
May 10th, I believe.
All right. As of May 10th, well, with May 10th as our marker, is it safe to say you've not given the investigative report that you were asked to continue and complete by May 10th?
Correct.
All right. I don't think I have anything more from Lieutenant Nielsen.
Thank you, Ms. Nielsen. Any redirect?
Just a few questions, thank you. Lieutenant Nielsen, did you complete your investigation within the 45-day window?
The initial one before
Yes.
I received this list?
Yes.
Yes.
And why did you conduct additional interviews?
the director saw my recommendation and determined that he wanted more information rather than the 6 people that we talked to. He wanted to corroborate more of what those 6 people said. So he wanted me to speak with more employees to gather more information.
So you asked for the extension in accordance with an ask from your director.
Correct.
No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nielsen. Do you have another witness?
Yeah, but he just walked out.
We do. He just walked out.
Okay. Here he comes.
Sarpy County calls interim director Jacob Betzworth.
Good afternoon, sir. Would you please state your full name?
Sure, Jacob Paul Betzworth.
And would you please state your position with the county?
I am the interim corrections director.
And would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Betzworth, can you state your name, your job title, and a brief summary of your employment history for the board, please?
Sure. My name is Jacob Betzworth. I'm the interim corrections director for the Sarpy County Correctional Center. Prior to that, I served 19 years at the Sarpy County Sheriff's Office, where I rose through the ranks to the rank of captain before I retired. During that time, I was the lieutenant and captain of the Professional Standards Unit for about 4 years, gaining experience in what we're talking about today.
And are you familiar with internal affairs investigations based on your history?
Very.
And are you aware of what has been labeled 2024 IA007?
Intimately.
Can you tell the board what that is?
That is a internal investigation that was started against Sergeant Sorick with several allegations. Reference, do you want me to get into what they're referencing? I can. Would you like me to get into what the allegations were? Or no?
Not at this time, Director Betzworth. Did you have an opportunity to review Lieutenant Nielsen's findings report in this internal affairs investigation?
I did.
And do you recall what date you reviewed that on?
Shortly after it was submitted.
What do you mean by submitted?
Shortly after she submitted it into Guardian with her completed findings report and her completed classification and discipline form.
Okay. Do you have any obligation to wait to review Lieutenant Nielsen's findings report until after Assistant Director Joe Martin submits her review to you?
No,
That's not listed anywhere in policy that you have to wait.
it is not.
Can you describe to the board what your memorandum exhibit is? It's labeled Exhibit 4.
That is a memo to request Lieutenant Nielsen to provide additional interviews. What I did was, when I started to look at the information that was in the file at that point, I looked at the interviews, the transcripts of the interviews that have already been completed. In several of those interviews, people would state or make statements on Sergeant Sorick's conduct or things that he had said, and they weren't necessarily corroborated by somebody else when I was reading the other transcripts. And so for his benefit and the benefit of the Correctional Center, I asked for additional interviews to be completed so I could either corroborate or contradict the things that people had said were said or done inside that investigation.
Are you familiar with the discipline recommendation that Lieutenant Nielsen submitted?
Yes,
What was that recommendation?
termination.
Were you comfortable, based on the information you had received, to move forward with a termination?
Me personally, when I'm going to go make a termination recommendation, and I'm the final decision in that recommendation. So to be clear, Lieutenant Nielsen can make whatever recommendation she wants. Assistant Director Joe Martin can make whatever recommendation she wants. Ultimately, that decision falls on me. And so when I looked through the information, was there enough there to go forward with a termination recommendation? Probably technically. I asked for it because I don't believe that there was enough cooperation or contradiction to prove or disprove for me to go stand in front of this board someday and say, that Sergeant Sork should be terminated.
In your opinion, and based on your years of experience at the sheriff's office, do these additional interviews you requested have the potential to benefit Sergeant Sork?
Absolutely.
In what way?
They can contradict what one person might say, somebody who has a vendetta that we don't know about. Again, if one person says one thing and another person says another, that's hearsay by definition. If one person says one thing and it's corroborated by several others independently, we're talking about a different thing there.
In your opinion, has this IA been investigated in a timely manner?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Several times in investigations, both in the 45-day time period and in the review period, they can get bigger than what was initially complained about, if that makes sense. As you can imagine, if you get people in a room and get them start to talk about issues, they're going to tell you about what happened. And sometimes they tell you about other things that you need to go investigate and corroborate, and that takes time. And so while you think about it within 45 days, you have weekends, people's schedules, you have the investigation schedule. And so in order to schedule those and give people appropriate time and the right time to take the seriousness of what the matter is, sometimes it takes longer than 45 days. And sometimes during the review period, while you're reviewing it, which is what happened in my case, you see things that you want further investigation so you can make good decisions. And that's what I did.
Are you familiar with Standard Operating Procedure 5080?
I am.
Can you explain to the board what that SOP is?
Sure. And what was the reference number on that, just so I can put it in front of me?
I think it's Exhibit 8.
Exhibit 8.
So that is our standard operating procedure when it comes to our complaint procedure and the procedures that we follow as we do those complaints.
And to your knowledge, does this SOP contain time constrictions for internal affairs investigations?
Yes.
Is it possible to adhere to those time constrictions in every single internal affairs investigation?
No.
Can you describe that?
Again, within 45 days when we get an initial complaint, we start to investigation. We try to do it as quickly as possible, obviously, but we want to do it as thoroughly as possible too. And I will agree with some of the earlier testimony. Our goal is to get those done within 45 days. For the employee health, for the health of the organization, it's imperative. There are times where it becomes too big or there takes too much cooperation or contradiction and a search for the truth before I will make a determination. And so that timeline goes past 45 days, and that happens, I won't say routinely, but it does happen.
Are there any authorized specific exceptions to the 45-day timeline within SOP 5080?
Specifically, let's just for a second. So under SOP 5080, under E, it talks about formal complaints and line investigations. And under subsection 4, it says, upon completing the completed investigation file, each reviewer shall have 8 calendar days to complete the review and return the file to the next chain of command. Extensions may be provided or approved by the director.
And you said extensions may be requested and approved. Does this SOP limit who can ask for an extension?
No. Well, I shouldn't say that. In some ways, the person who's investigating it or one of the reviewers. You can't just ask for an extension, if that's what you mean.
Correct. So turning to the very beginning of SOP 5080, is there a purpose stated of the SOP?
Under one policy, is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Does this paragraph contemplate why this SOP is in place?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the board?
Sure. I mean, the parts of it that are extremely important. Procedures have been established for receiving and investigating complaints against employees of our correctional center to provide fair, objective, and expeditious dispositions of complaints.
Is it safe to say, in your opinion, Director Betzworth, that this policy must balance the interests of both the employee and the correctional center?
Yes.
Can you, as a director, administer discipline even if timelines are not met?
Yes.
Where in the policy does it allow you to do that?
I just want to make an objection for the record. That's calling for a legal conclusion. And I just want to make that objection.
What I'm going to say is, I'm going to give you an opportunity to clarify where you're pointing to, because it sounds like you're not reading illegal, but in the policy. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, go
I'm
ahead and
asking
finish.
for Director Betzworth's opinion based on his years of experience at the Sheriff's Office.
Okay,
As to what?
you want to repeat your question?
Absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Young, your opinion as you review this policy is that you must balance the needs of the correctional center and the employee.
Mr. Betzworth must, yes. You told me Mr. Young.
You called him Mr. Young, he's just.
Sorry, I was referencing Mr. Young and looking at you.
We're often confused for one another.
Based on your experience, Mr. Betzworth, when you read this policy, what interests do you have to balance when you're administering discipline?
Absolutely. I have to balance the safety, security, and the wholeness of my organization that I'm running, as well as the employee that's being investigated. It's not lost on me that they might be on administrative leave, like they were in this case, or subject to investigation, which I have been myself, and it is stressful. And so I have to balance those things and ultimately find the truth.
Now, you mentioned administrative leave. Is it your understanding that Sergeant Sorek is out on administrative leave?
Yes.
What is the purpose of placing an employee who is under an active investigation on administrative leave?
There are several purposes. One of them might be for that employee's own health and well-being. Maybe they're in a place where being at work is not good for them or for the organization. Other times during the investigation, you'll come to a point where you realize that maybe what that employee has done to other employees could deter or hurt the health and safety and security of the organization if they stay there through the remainder of the investigation until the investigation is complete.
And while an employee is on administrative leave, are they being paid?
Yes.
Are they receiving any financial hardship as a result?
No.
Now, moving forward from SOP 5080, are you familiar with FOP 90 collective bargaining agreement?
Yes.
And does the collective bargaining agreement address timelines for investigations?
It does not.
Does the collective bargaining agreement address standard operating procedures?
It might reference them, but it does not address them.
And moving forward from the timeline issue, there is a second allegation that Lieutenant Nielsen compromised this investigation. Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Did you address this allegation in your grievance response?
I did.
And did Lieutenant Nielsen compromise the investigation, in your opinion?
Not at all.
Can you explain why?
When she requested the response from Sergeant Sorek to say, give me your response, he had already initially given his initial report. And really, not to get into semantics here, but that is the time for the employee to give their response. Now, to be fair to him, what they were trying to do was say, okay, now you've looked at further allegations against you. Here's a chance for you to respond to them. His allegation is that she did not tell him to send it to our support staff that types it up. Her job is simply to format what is already typed up and then send it to Lieutenant Nielsen. It was going to Lieutenant Nielsen within an hour or 2 or 3, certainly within the next 24 hours. So I would argue that it's semantics really about whether you say send it to me or send it to Lieutenant Nielsen. She is the investigator, the primary investigator, has access to all of the pertinent information. Quite frankly, she gathers it from that same person and then submits it into the program that moves it along.
Did the timeline extension for Lieutenant Nielsen's request violate SOP or county policies?
No,
Why not?
because it was in the review period.
So
Number one,
for clarification, Lieutenant Nielsen testified earlier that she submitted her findings report to Guardian Tracking on April 29th. Is that correct?
Correct.
And at that point, you're stating this triggered the review period under policy.
Correct.
And you testified earlier that the SOP does not limit who can ask for an extension. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is there anything else you believe this board needs to know in making a decision related to this grievance?
Absolutely. I think what's being talked about here today, and maybe what's being asserted to, is that this never happens during a review period, and that's not true. During my experience and my years of doing professional standards, doing probably 100 line investigations or internal affairs investigations. When it goes up that chain of command, people are going to naturally see things that other people don't see, right? Or don't have a different perspective. And so they might say, I want that person further interviewed. I want that other interview done before they can be comfortable making a disciplinary recommendation, frankly, for somebody's job, which is very serious. That is what happened today. That is what happened in this incident. That's what you're listening to today is, during that review period, I saw things in there that were alleged by some employees, and they referenced other people who may have heard or seen the alleged incidents. And I simply asked for them to be interviewed so I could either corroborate or contradict the earlier statements, and I could make a true recommendation on their discipline, frankly, because Sergeant Sork's job is facing termination, and I think it's very important.
No further questions.
Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
I know you've been subject to IAs in the past. You admitted that.
I've been subject to line investigations in the past, yes.
Did I represent you by chance? No.
No, I represented myself.
All right.
It was pretty minor.
just curious.
A couple minor things, yeah.
Do you happen to remember the Sarpy County IA policy for the sheriff's department that you work for?
I remember quite a bit of it, yes. I mean, can I recite it for you off the top of my head right now?
No, I know you can't do that. I can't either. But let me ask you a question. Does the sheriff's IA policy have a provision that provides for extensions for the time period to complete investigations?
I wouldn't be able to recall that without looking at it.
All right. I'm just curious. Let me just take you through a few questions so we can understand this. I took Lieutenant Nielsen through a similar line of questions, but I want to ask you because you've raised something, I think, different than what she said. And that's this. I understand there's an investigation to be completed, and would you agree with me that this standard operating procedure 5080 is the set of rules that Sarpy County has issued as the Department of Corrections for the management of internal affairs investigations in your department?
Yes.
Right. And this is the rule that governs this particular investigation and how it's supposed to go. Am I right?
Correct.
Now, we talked about with Lieutenant Nielsen that there's two stages to an investigation. There's the investigation stage, and that's completed by the investigator. And that investigator also includes her own recommendations for classification and determination of, or recommendation for disciplinary penalty. Remember that? Were you here for that conversation? Okay. And then she loads it up into Guardian. It goes to Assistant Director Joe Martin, but I take it also goes to you at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, during that chain of command, you can go into Guardian. If you're obviously the director, you can go in and look at it.
Okay. And at that time, I think you said that triggered the the classification and review period. Is that what you just testified to?
When she submitted it to Assistant Director Martin, it started her 8 days.
For Assistant Director Martin to review and do the classification of her own?
Correct. And mind you, also could request additional investigation if she so wished.
Okay. Did Director Martin ever actually do that?
She and I had a conversation about it, and I did it in her stead.
Okay. But did she ever actually fill out the form?
There's not a form to fill out if you ask for an extension. I mean, let me take that back. You don't fill out a classification and disciplinary form if you're asking for an extension. That's put on pause while the extension is being.
Okay, so is the classification review the process put on pause then once you issue this memo to Lieutenant Nielsen that she needs to do additional investigation?
Yes.
Okay. So we're not in the classification or review process timeframe anymore. We're back in the investigation time period. Is that fair to say?
I asked for that to happen, yes.
Yes, and we appreciate it. We understand that. If you could turn with me to exhibit number 8, page 4. And I just want to compare two provisions of exhibit 8. Exhibit 8, page 4, paragraph E sub 4 says, upon receiving the completed investigation file, each reviewer shall have 8 calendar days to complete their review, return the file to the next chain of command. Extensions may be approved by the director. When an extension is approved, and so on. And it talks about this 8-day review period and extensions. And if you don't comply with that 8 days, you could get your own jackpot. Fair to say?
Fair to say.
That does not state anywhere in that paragraph that extension authority that may be approved by you has to do with the 45-day calendar period that appears many pages later in this policy, does it?
Are you asking me if E subsection 4 applies to the 45 days?
That's correct.
Does it apply directly to the 45 days? I think it's a little ambiguous. What it does do is apply to the review period.
It's pretty clear that it applies to the review period. Fair to say? Okay. Now turn with me to the 45-day rule, which is, I think, on page 11, if I remember right. No, page 10, the top. There's another calendar period you got to comply with. Investigation shall be completed and submitted to the security administrator within 45 days from the time the complaint is received. Taken. See that?
Correct.
It doesn't have this language, extensions may be approved by the director, does it?
I suppose if I keep reading it, I don't know.
Well, I can tell you it doesn't, if you believe me, but sure could have, right?
Well, I'll go back to, at that point, the investigation was complete. It had been submitted. It was during its review period, and I asked for additional investigation and an extension for that additional questions to be answered.
And a classification review couldn't even be undertaken because the investigation wasn't even over at that point, correct?
No, I would contend that the investigation, as Lieutenant Nielsen did it, was complete.
Sure.
And then other people reviewed it, and during their review process, asked for further investigation.
Because you knew that you wanted additional information to either corroborate witness testimony or to contradict it for the benefit of the investigation, correct?
For the benefit of the investigation, which includes the safety and security of our facility and Sergeant Sorg.
Yeah, absolutely. In that regard, I mean, it's fair to say that the investigation, on your judgment, wasn't complete until that was done. Am I right?
It was completed to a point.
Right.
I wanted it further corroborated or contradicted.
It wasn't completed enough that I think you testified earlier that it wasn't complete enough for you to make a decision over somebody's career at the Sarpy County Corrections, right?
I testified that technically, could I have went forward with the recommendation? Yes. Would we probably be sitting in here on a personnel policy at some point and talking about it? Absolutely. Could there be some questions that were asked that I wanted to answer before we did that? That is my personal leadership philosophy on that.
Yeah, and I'm totally in favor of that. If you could turn to page 4, or exhibit number 4, here's the memo that you sent to Lieutenant Nielsen. You see that? Is that what that is?
I don't know. We're going back to numbers now?
Exhibit number 4. See that?
Yes.
Okay.
Exhibit number 4, I'm sorry. Yep.
Yeah, it's
Yep, I have it here, yes.
memo of May 1st.
Yep.
Now, I understand from Lieutenant Nielsen's testimony that she interviewed 6 people, including Sergeant Sorek. Did she actually interview the complainant during the original investigation?
During the original investigation, before she submitted a findings report to me, I don't recall that. I'm sorry. I'd have to look
Well,
at the.
it's on the list of people you say that she should have interviewed. Pereira is the person, am I right?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking me if she actually interviewed the complainant.
Right.
Correct. I do not believe she did.
And so you were saying, hey, You got to interview him. Fair to say? And you got to interview all of these people because they may have information that's important for me when I'm making a judgment about whether these things occurred or did not occur. Fair?
These names came up in the initial 6 interviews. My recollection is several of these, well, actually all of them, their names came up. And so I wanted them to either corroborate or contradict what was being said
Okay.
when they said, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
You're interviewing me and I said, you know, I heard Sergeant Sork say this. Next question is, who else heard that?
Yeah.
That might be Davis, Dugan, and Weekly. So I'm saying, let's go make sure.
Absolutely.
Did they hear what one person is asserting they said?
Absolutely. And those questions of all those people could have been conducted at an earlier time than May 1st when this was submitted to you. Fair?
I don't know that, based off my experience and the number of people that are on this list, 45 days would have been pushing it,
Might have been challenging.
very much so.
If she had completed those, let's say, or let's say that she'd completed the 6 interviews that she did complete and the other components of the investigation, let's say in May 15th, or excuse me, April 15th, and you had issued this memo and said, hey, you got to interview these other people. Would she have had the tools to bring people in and interview them, the authority to call them in and interview them under compulsion?
To some extent.
If I call you as an IA person, or am I required, are you required to attend the interview and give your account of what took place if you want to continue to be employed by the county?
I believe you have a certain amount of days that you have to be notified that you're coming in for an interview.
Okay. And do employees comply with those requests during IA processes typically?
Yes, they schedule them around, obviously, we have people that work 24/7, we're in emergency operations, so I'm not gonna take somebody off night shift to come in for an interview and make my night shift go short. That
Okay.
obviously compromises the safety and security of the facility. At the time I asked for extension, I think there was around 8 days left, and based off of this list, it was obvious that there's not gonna be enough time, which is why Lieutenant Nielsen asked me for the extension, and I therefore granted it. If I would have thought she could get it done in 8 days and done it well and correctly, and submitted me a complete package that would have, you know, helped us to make a recommendation, I would have certainly done that, but it was obvious that that was not going to happen.
Yeah, I understand. Let me, going back to this 45-day period, if the provision in this rule that was in place for providing extensions for the 8-day review period, you remember that? The extensions can be provided in the context of that 8-day review language. That language, if that's what the county wanted, could have been on page 10 where the 45-day limit on investigations is located, couldn't it?
I would take a process to do that, certainly.
Yes, it would take a process, but it could be done. It could, that extension authority that you had could have been put in this language, in this rule that governs you. Am I right?
With a process, yes.
Okay.
I couldn't just write it in there.
All right. Now, let me ask you about another provision. If you could turn to page 5 of Exhibit A. There is language in your rule that says, look, if you don't comply with the 8-day review period properly, if you don't get your extensions and so on, how does that affect, this is on page 5 at the top of Exhibit A, how does that affect whether you can issue discipline or not?
Failure to meet investigative review deadlines shall not affect the director's right to administer discipline.
Now, that language doesn't say failure to meet the investigative 45-day period shall not affect the authority of you to give discipline, does it?
Well, it says what applies to this situation, which is the deadline that they were under to do the next step of the investigation. An extension was provided during that deadline, and therefore the deadline was extended outward.
Yeah, but if we already agreed that we were not doing a review anymore, we were back to the investigation. Do you remember testifying to that?
When I asked for the additional interviews, we were in the review process.
Okay. But then it returned to an investigation period, correct?
Correct.
And there's going to be a new submission and a new review process at the end of that investigation, true? Okay. Now, let me ask you about this language on top of page 5. That language could have been put in place when we were talking about the overall 45-day rule with regard to the initial investigation. That could have been in this rule as well, couldn't it have been?
With a several-week process, yes.
Okay, but it wasn't.
Again, this policy was written and in place before I got there, but no, it was not in place when I got there.
All right. Was this report that that you asked Nielsen to supplement with these additional witnesses and interviews and so on, was that completed by May 10th, 2024?
Her additional findings report? No.
Okay, has it been submitted even today?
No.
All right. I don't have any more questions for Director.
Any redirect?
Thank you. Director Bedsworth, you testified earlier that you are familiar with the collective bargaining agreement. Is this correct?
Correct.
Does this collective bargaining agreement give you authority to conduct internal affairs investigations?
It does.
You testified earlier that you're familiar with the personnel policy rules and regulations?
Mildly.
Mildly. To your awareness, does this personnel rules and regulations affect your ability to administer discipline or investigate employees?
That I do know it does not.
So you have broad discretion
Correct.
under,
I'm going to object. It's calling for a
rephrase.
legal conclusion. Sorry.
I'll
go ahead.
rephrase. The personnel rules and regulations allows you to administer discipline. Is this correct?
Correct.
Now, there's been lots of talk about the 45-day timeline, the 8-day extension for review. Lieutenant Nielsen submitted her findings report to you in the 45-day timeline. Is this correct?
Correct.
And you entered a review period.
Correct.
And you requested additional interviews
Correct.
during this review period.
Correct.
Extensions are authorized of the review period.
Correct.
No further questions.
Thank you. Yeah, board members, you're welcome to ask any questions of any witness if you have.
I have a very simple question.
Sure. Sit back down and answer it. I'm sorry.
What was the date of the original allegation?
I don't want to give you the wrong information, so I'm going to reference it back. Could you make the reference number? You're asking for the date of the initial allegation?
That was a stipulated fact, Jonathan.
Right, so it's not in our packet. That's what I couldn't remember.
It's March 26th, 2024 is the
correct.
date that the complaint was filed with HR.
Well, I'm reading on page 4, and it says formal complaints and line investigation inquiries submitted more than 30 calendar days after the alleged incident. So I'm trying to make the timeline from the incident to the time of filing.
That's not something within the scope of this appeal and not something you've been provided with.
Okay, well, we referenced that, the subparagraphs under time constraints repeatedly during the testimony. And so to me, and it only applies if it's within those bounds. So I have a hard time interpreting sections 2 and 4, which were referenced by counsel, when the intro to that paragraph that they're referencing says they shall not be investigated except under the following circumstances, and then we don't have that information.
I can answer that question if you'd like.
Go ahead.
So you're referencing E, time constraints?
E, time constraints, yes.
Okay. It says, shall not be investigated outside of 30 calendar days unless under the following circumstances?
Yes.
Submitted more than 30 days.
Submitted.
So just from knowing this case, and I'll just tell you, subsection 3 says, when the good of the Sarpy County Correctional Center, the public, and the employees is at stake, the director may allow an investigation to be conducted if the necessity for an investigation outweighs the time constraint guideline. I will tell you that it didn't, but in this case, I would have done it anyway.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You bet.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank you, sir.
Maybe can I ask a follow-up based upon this question that was asked?
Sure.
Just to make sure, because it is confusing. The 30 days that the Personnel Policy Board member Davidson was asking about, explain what that's referring to.
So the person making the complaint has 30 days to make the complaint, right? And that is so that you can't just hold it in your back pocket for a year and a half down the road when now somebody said something to you don't like, and then you can make a complaint against them. That's what it's referring to. So it refers to from the time any part of the incident happened until you make a complaint about it.
Thank you.
And what I would say is, in this case, knowing it personally, there were things that were in the complaint that were within that time period. But if there were not, even that being said, some of the allegations that were in the complaint were serious enough that number 3 would apply, and I would have applied that rule.
Perfect.
All right, Ms. Starbuck, your next witness.
We have no further witnesses.
Great, thank you. Mr. Young? your
I
first
just
witness?
call John Sorick briefly.
Mr. Storb, please state your name for the record
John Sort,
and your position at the county.
Corrections Sergeant.
And would you please raise your right hand? Mr. Stork, do you affirm that the testimony that you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
So, Sergeant Sorick, could you just turn with me to the exhibit book there, just very briefly? And I want to ask you just to make sure we make a record of your filing of the grievance, okay? And so I want to take you to Exhibit C, towards the back. Do you recognize Exhibit C?
Yes.
What is that?
That is my grievance regarding the extension of the investigation.
So that was the initial grievance, and you see page 2 there? Did you write that?
Yes,
So that's your attachment, am I right?
that is my attachment.
And what date did you file that?
I filed that on May 10th.
All right. And then let's go to Exhibit D. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
This would be Interim Director Betzworth's response to my grievance, rejecting it.
Okay, so this is where he denied the grievance,
Yes.
and he gives the reasons for it, correct?
Yes.
All right. Then you could go to Exhibit E. Sorry, what was the date on that?
The date on this would be, it says May 16th.
All right. And then Exhibit E. What is that?
Is that E or, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, the next page there.
This would be my submission for an appeal, to appeal the decision, which I submitted to HR.
And what date did you submit that appeal?
It says May 16th.
Okay. Okay, I just need to establish those timelines, okay? That's all I have.
Ms. Starbuck, do you have any questions for this witness?
I have no questions for this witness.
Thank you. Anyone on the Personnel Policy Board? Thank you, Mr. Or Sergeant. Mr. Young, do you have any other witnesses?
I don't, thank you. We'd rest.
Ms. Starbuck, would you like to do a closing?
Yes, thank you.
And I just remind you, 5 minutes or less.
Absolutely, thank
Thank you.
you. Board members, you've heard a lot of testimony today about relative timelines. What you need to remember is that 2024 IA 007 was investigated in a timely manner to the best of Lieutenant Nielsen's ability. There was lots of questions about the 45-day timeline, and Interim Director Betzworth has testified that this 45-day timeline was abided by. Lieutenant Nielsen submitted her findings report within 34 to 35 days, and it was in that review period that, at the direction of the director, she requested additional time to complete interviews. This IA was not compromised, as Lieutenant Nielsen has access to all documents pertaining to the investigation as the primary investigator. We maintain that Sergeant Sorik's allegations that the SOPs, collective bargaining agreement, and personnel rules and regulations were violated have no merit. If you determine at this time that the IA should be administratively closed, we would still have grounds to act on the findings report that Lieutenant Nielsen submitted within the 45-day timeline with the recommendation of termination. Management actions in this case were not arbitrary or capricious. Mr. Young has brought a case to your attention that talks about this standard. This case specifically addresses the personnel rules and regulations and collective bargaining agreement. In this case, these documents were not violated. The personnel rules and regulations give Director Betzworth the ability to fully investigate and discipline his employees, and the collective bargaining agreement does not pose any timelines for this investigation. We respectfully ask that you deny Sergeant Sorik's grievance and suggested remedy. Thank you.
Thanks for your attention. I appreciate it very much. I realize it's a difficult thing to do as a personnel board. I practice in front of them all the time, and you don't get paid, and it's labor of love, perhaps. Appreciate it. The key thing here is the deadline. These deadlines are not guidelines. They're not soft deadlines. They're required by law to be followed if the county adopts them. In Exhibit number 8 is all you really need to know to understand this case. There is a deadline that says that if once the investigation is complete, there's a review period. Extensions can be granted for that period. That's the only place that language says that. The contract, or excuse me, the policy also says is that if the extensions are granted or not granted and the review period is followed or not followed, it doesn't matter to whether discipline can be issued. 7 pages later is the provisions about the actual investigation period timeline. There is, the reason why it matters, how these rules are written, is because those rules do not provide for an extension period to be granted. There is no authority to grant extensions. And there is also no language which says, hey, if we violate this 45-day rule, it doesn't matter with regard to the discipline involved. Why? It's because those are the key factors for how law enforcement agencies and their employees govern the length of IA investigations, which are extremely stressful events for officers involved in them. I asked, you may remember, I asked Lieutenant Betzworth, Jacob Betzworth, what happens in Sarpy County Sheriff's Office with regard to this? If the sheriff can't get an investigation done within 45 days, does that mean it just doesn't happen? The answer is no, because there's specific statement in their rules which allows the sheriff to extend the time period for IA investigations so long as he gives notice to the employee of the reason for that extension. There are no such language that protect the sheriff in his department that protects Jacob in his. And the key thing is Blakesley says that this is not just a matter of, well, hey, no, it's okay, we're just going to let it go forward. Blakesley, the case I gave you, says, is if the county makes rules that govern these things, it must abide by them. If it doesn't, the actions of the county are null and void and, in fact, unlawful. And so here's the simple solution to this case. Abide by the rules as they are written. If they need to be revised to allow for extensions, then by all means do that. We generally don't object to those things because some cases require more than 45 days to investigate. But at least the employee knows what's going on along the way and there's standards in place. If you want a rule that says it doesn't matter if you violate the rule, you can still discipline the person, then put that in the rule. It's very simple. If those two things had been in this rules, we would have no case. But the key thing to remember is they're not in the rule. And so we would ask you to find that the investigation is unlawful to go forward, and the actions, any actions taken are null and void.
Thank you, Mr. Young. I think at this time, the board would make a motion to go into executive session.
So move.
Second.
Roll call.
4:40.
Hang on, I gotta vote on that.
Do we need to leave that? Is that what you're asking, Pam?
I think, are you?
motion to return?
Like to make a motion to reconvene? Yep.
Second, even?
I second.
Who you seconded? Who did?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I'll do it.
It is 4:57.
Stephen, did you vote?
To reconvene.
Sorry.
4A, motion carries.
So in response to Mr. Sorik's grievance, it appears there's two issues that would take 2 votes for the board on issue 1 and issue 2. Council, do you agree?
Which issues, Tam, sorry?
I think the first one is, did the county violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to extensions?
Okay, all right, what's the second issue?
Did the county violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to report routing?
Yeah, that second issue, we don't intend to continue that one. It's indifferent, we're indifferent to whether you rule on that, so the first one's is the real issue for us.
I think he would have to withdraw the grievance appeal as to issue number 2 if that's what they intend to do, or the board would have to vote.
That's correct. Do you want to withdraw that second issue, Mr. Young, from the grievance?
Well, if you've already resolved it, I suppose you can, but we don't need to, but yeah, I just wanted to understand where you were thinking about.
Okay,
So we'll just leave it.
leave it?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that sound like acceptable? We'll vote on both?
Yes.
Okay, so issue 1, did the county violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to the extension?
Hang on, sorry. Okay. Need a motion, or we just go to vote?
We put
Yeah.
a vote.
We don't have to have a motion, okay.
I make a motion.
No motion needed.
I don't think we need a motion at this
You
point.
said we needed to make a
We're
motion.
just voting
I'm like,
on the
okay, let's do
2
it.
issues. And then we'll make a motion to the grievance. Yes. So the question is, did the county violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to the extension? Carrie, are we voting on that?
Yes, sorry. Well, hang on, it's gonna make me motion. Okay, now go ahead and vote.
So against is no.
4 is
Pardon?
4 yes or
appear germane.
against no.
Yes, if we did not violate, no.
But it's not,
against
no, it's for or against.
Against would be you're saying you're against the statement, so that would be no.
Well, Pam, do you want to articulate it the way you want to, and then they can?
Yeah, it's for or against.
Okay, so the voting is for or against. Okay, so if for means that you believe the county did violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure. A vote against is that you do not believe that the county violated SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to extensions.
Thank you for that clarity.
I have 4 votes against.
So that means that the county, they believe the board has determined that the county did not violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to extensions on issue 1. The next issue to vote on is, did the county violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to report routing? 4 is you do believe that the county violated. Against, you do believe the county did not violate SOP 5080 complaint procedure specific to routing.
hang on. I have 4 votes against.
Okay, so at this time, the board would make a motion to deny the pending grievance of Mr. John Sorick.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Four yea, none against, motion carries.
Would you like to do a motion to close the grievance hearing?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to close the grievance hearing for Sergeant John Sorick.
I'll move that we close the session.
Okay.
Well, who seconded? Sorry.
You have to ask for one.
All right.
Okay. Four yea, motion carries.
Decision can be announced. Now the decision is announced.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Hang on, sorry.
We're done.
Diane, are you, I don't have your vote.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Passes 3-1.
I got a question for you.
Four yea, motion carries.
I'll
Thank
make you sit here all night.
It's okay.